October 18, 1944. 0720 hours. A gray rain stitched the Lincolnshire sky into a single wet sheet. Obergefreiter Martin Keller climbed down from the cattle wagon with rope burns at his wrists and a certainty in his stomach. Now the true punishment would begin. Berlin's broadcasts had hammered the lesson for years. Britain would starve, beat, and break German prisoners. Expect the whip. Expect the quarry. Expect to be used up. The words had followed him from the hedgerows of Normandy, across the Channel, into the sour straw of the transport car. He'd repeated them like a prayer, not to believe, but to prepare. 200 prisoners formed a crooked column along the siding, boots sinking in cinders. A British sergeant walked the line, not snarling, not striking, simply counting, his pencil ticking a ledger with the indifference of rain. Behind him, Home Guard men in greatcoats stood with rifles at a patient angle. No jeers, no spittle. Discipline so quiet it felt like fog. "Move off," the sergeant said in slow German and pointed. The road led to a fence that should have been iron and menace. It wasn't. Timber posts, 3 strands of wire, a painted board, "Prisoner of War Camp 178, Geneva Convention observed." To the right, wooden barracks in neat rows, stovepipes breathing thin curls of smoke. To the left, a cookhouse exhaling onions and barley, and something that hinted at beef. The smell came like a betrayal. Keller forced his eyes forward, parade ground habit holding back the tremor in his hands. Beside him shuffled Fritz Albers, barely 19, muzzle burn still raw on his cheek. Schmidt, a machinist from Bremen, who never stopped murmuring shop measurements under his breath, and Oberfeldwebel Sauer, the last intact shard of their shattered chain of command. They stepped through the gate together. The expected blow did not fall. Inside the square, the British did what soldiers always do when they are sure of themselves. They organized. Names were taken at a table where a corporal's fountain pen moved like a metronome. Pockets were emptied into canvas sacks stamped POW. Pocket knives, photographs, a chest knife carved from bone, a folded mass card. The man with the pen read each item aloud as he recorded it, as if promising it back by the simple act of writing it down. Medical orderlies checked pulses, changed dressings, and dabbed antiseptic on cut knuckles with the clinical boredom of men who had seen worse. A Red Cross notice board listed parcel days and the rules for letters home. Across from it hung a clock that kept British time, precise, audible, indifferent. "Tea," said a private, younger than Keller, lifting a kettle the size of a helmet. He poured into metal mugs, milk first, then the brown stream, sugar measured by habit. Keller hesitated until duty became thirst. The first swallow burned a path down his chest and left the startling taste of kindness without warmth. Not friendship, not pity, just the refusal to make suffering a sport. The camp commandant appeared with the same inevitability as the rain. Middle-aged, boots clean, eyes that recorded without gloating. He addressed them in careful German, the genders unreliable, but the intent exact. "You will be quartered 6 to a hut. Roll call at 0700 and 1800. Food according to ration. Letters monthly, censored. Work details posted daily. No violence, no escape attempts. We will be firm, we will be fair." A ripple moved the column when he said work, the rumor that had seeped under doors from Poland to the Ruhr, forced labor until a man snapped. The commandant let the silence run a beat, then added, "Farms, forestry, rail repair, paid in camp tokens, canteen Friday, soap, tobacco, biscuits if available." He looked almost apologetic on the last phrase. War was war, shelves were shelves. A corporal led Keller's group to Hut 14C. Inside, 6 iron bunks, straw mattresses, 2 wool blankets folded with parade precision, a coal stove with a scuttle ready, and a table with a Bible and, impossibly, 2 paperback novels stamped County Library. On the wall above the stove, a bilingual notice: "No smoking near stove. Lights out, 21:30. By order." Fritz Albers touched the blanket as if it might recoil. "Herr Obergefreiter, is this punishment?"
Keller swallowed. He had prepared the boys under his care for clubs and hunger. He had nothing ready for rules that protected. He crossed to the window. Beyond the wire lay flat fields seamed with hedgerows, a tractor coughing to life, and a stackyard built by hands for weather older than war. He imagined, against his own training, the weight of a spade, the rhythm of a row, the ache that ends when the bell rings 4 o'clock. Boots scuffed at the door. A British corporal paused, cap pulled low, rein stringing from the brim. "Work posts at 6 o'clock. Bring boots. Mud's a devil." He glanced at Keller's bandaged wrist. "You there. See the MO for that. No use to anyone if it festers." The tone wasn't tender. It was practical. Then he was gone, absorbed by the weather and the program. Keller sat on the lower bunk. The stove ticked as coal began to learn its fire. Somewhere, a whistle blew for another platoon of strangers. He looked at his men, their faces hollow and suddenly young, and heard himself say the last thing he expected to say on his first day in captivity. "We will keep our bearing. We will learn their system. And tomorrow," he glanced at the scuttle, the boots, the rain, the fields beyond. "Tomorrow, we will work." Outside, the English sky kept its counsel. Inside, the first fracture spread through a wall no club could break, the certainty that cruelty was the only language left.
The next morning began with the whistle. Shrill, punctual, British. Fog clung to the barracks like unwashed wool, the kind that never truly dried. Keller rubbed his eyes, half expecting the day to reveal the brutality that hadn't yet come. But the brutality never came. Only routine. Breakfast was ladled from a tin pot, porridge thick enough to stand a spoon in, bread still warm, tea sweetened sparingly. It wasn't indulgence, it was regulation. Every ration weighed, logged, justified by paragraph and precedent. At 06:15, the work details were posted on a chalkboard nailed to the mess hall wall. Camp 178 work assignments. October 19th, 1944. Road repair, 30 men. Timber yard, 24 men. Local farms, 60 men. Laundry and maintenance, 12 men. Kitchen and sanitation, 8 men. Next to each task, a British corporal had written in blue pencil, 2 breaks, no talking outside supervision, no political discussion. It was order, not kindness. Keller's name appeared under local farms. The lorry rattled along a lane that smelled of wet earth and diesel. The guards rode facing backward, rifles upright between their knees, boots planted in the mud-smeared bed. No one spoke. The English countryside rolled past. Hedges, sheep, brick farmhouses, all maddeningly untouched by the destruction Keller had left behind in France. When they arrived, Farmer Hughes was waiting. 50, stout, arms like plow handles. His handshake was a nod more than a gesture. He told the corporal, "They can dig. That'll do." They were led to a field scarred with drainage ditches. The work was backbreaking. Spades, picks, mud to the knees. But it wasn't punishment. It was work that mattered, and Hughes treated it that way. "Dig straight, not faster. Straighter," he barked. Keller obeyed, expecting mockery. None came. By midday, the farmer's wife brought out a tray of enamel mugs and a loaf of brown bread wrapped in cloth. The guards looked uncertain. She looked unbothered. "They can have it," she said firmly. "Work's work." Hughes didn't disagree. "Don't mistake it for charity, Fritz," he grumbled in broken German. "You eat what you earn." The men nodded. Even hunger could respect fairness. Back at the camp, the evening routine unfolded like a machine that had learned civility. Roll call, inspection, letters distributed. Rudy, the youngest in Keller's hut, had received his first postcard through the Red Cross channel. It was from his sister in Bremen, censored, but real. He held it under the single light bulb, eyes wide, whispering each word aloud. "He says she still has the cat." A silence followed that wasn't quite envy.
Even Albers smiled. He said cats live through everything, he softly said. The guards performed their checks and left. Outside, a harmonica started. Somewhere else, boots thudded softly in rhythm, men walking, not marching. That night, Keller wrote his first letter home. We are treated not cruelly. There is food and work. The guards are distant, but not hateful. I cannot explain it. Perhaps they see us as labor, not enemies. Perhaps this is how they win, by keeping their order when we have lost ours. He hesitated, then added in smaller script, Tell Mother I am alive. Tell her the English drink more tea than is possible for any man. He folded the paper, signed his name, and set it on the corner of the table where the Morning Post would collect it. In the dark, the stove crackled. Outside, rain drummed the roofs with the same rhythm as the shovels in the field. And Keller realized, with the slow, quiet horror of a man unlearning what he had been taught, that the enemy's strength was not in violence, but in discipline disguised as mercy. Tomorrow they would return to the farm, and the English would still say please, still keep records, still hand out tea. It was not the captivity he had been warned of. It was something far more difficult to endure, decency.
By November, Camp 178 had settled into a rhythm so regular it could have been mistaken for a factory. Every sound came on schedule. The whistle at dawn, the coal shovel striking iron at breakfast, the church bell from the nearby village at noon. Routine had become their jailer and their strange comfort. The prisoners no longer jumped at English voices. They understood the tone now, clipped, restrained, endlessly polite. Even punishment, when it came, was administered by paperwork. When one man was caught hiding an apple from the farm detail, there was no beating, no humiliation. He was summoned to the commandant's office, handed a form, and made to read the Geneva Convention article on property rights aloud. Then he was reassigned to latrine duty for 2 weeks. The lesson was clear. Decency could discipline harder than a whip. Keller's farm detail grew tighter as winter deepened. The morning fog rolled low over the fields, blending the prisoners and guards into gray silhouettes. Their breath steamed as they worked, breaking frost with spades, stacking hay, cutting wood. Farmer Hughes barked less now. Words had been replaced by gestures and habit. The farm dog, Bess, no longer growled when the Germans passed. Sometimes she followed Keller down the furrows, her paws leaving tracks beside his. At midday, Hughes's wife would appear with bread and dripping, poured tea from a dented pot, and watch the men eat in silence. It wasn't friendship. It was a truce between people who understood labor as a language older than war. "Hard winter comin'," Hughes muttered one afternoon, testing the soil with his boot. Keller nodded. "Cold makes men equal." The farmer squinted at him, half smiling. "Aye, and mud hides uniforms." Back in the camp, the British guards had started teaching English phrases in the evenings, not officially, just from boredom. Private Ellis, the youngest one, turned it into a game. He'd point to objects: boot, table, window, mug. The prisoners would repeat in chorus, mispronouncing half of them until laughter broke through the language barrier. Keller watched it unfold from his bunk, cautious but unable to suppress a faint smile. Even laughter, in this strange limbo, felt like contraband. Later that night, Ellis appeared at the hut door holding a small parcel. "For your men, from the Red Cross, chocolates and soap." "Soap and chocolate," Albers whispered as the door shut. "For prisoners." Keller opened the box. 6 bars, stamped with the Red Cross emblem, and a note in English he could barely read. "Distributed equally. Report shortages."
the bureaucracy of kindness. The British even organized their mercy. By Christmas, something unthinkable had happened. The prisoners were invited to the village church service. Not all, only a handful of the best-behaved farm workers, escorted by 2 guards. Keller was one of them. The church smelled of pine and wax. English voices sang Silent Night in halting unison. When the melody reached Stille Nacht, a few Germans couldn't help but join in, quietly at first, then stronger, until the verses overlapped in 2 languages. For one fragile moment, the walls between enemy and enemy dissolved into song. After the service, the vicar handed out small paper bags, raisins, biscuits, a single orange each, a luxury Keller hadn't seen since before the war. He bowed slightly and said, "Danke." The vicar nodded. "Your men, same as ours. War ends, but hunger doesn't." That night in Hut 14C, the men shared the raisins one by one, splitting each like communion. Keller wrote in his notebook by the glow of the stove, "We are not treated as beasts, not even as enemies. We are treated as responsibilities. The British way of cruelty is this: they do not hate us, they simply refuse to stop being civilized." Outside, the frost thickened on the wire until it gleamed silver under the floodlights. The camp was still a prison, but it had become a place where discipline looked like humanity, and that was somehow harder to bear.
January 1945. The winter wind cut like glass over the Lincolnshire fields, and yet the days inside Camp 178 passed with an order so exact it felt almost sacred. The stove smoked on schedule, the guards rotated shifts like clockwork. And though the war outside was burning toward its final inferno, inside the wire there was only routine, a rhythm made of labor, tea, and the muted sound of boots on frozen earth. The work details had expanded. Now the Germans repaired fences, unloaded coal, and helped rebuild barns damaged by storms. The guards watched from a distance, rifles slung, hands in pockets, faces more bored than hostile. Keller had stopped expecting cruelty long ago. Now he expected structure, the British creed that every task, no matter how menial, must serve a rule. On a freezing morning in late January, the lorry brought them to a new site, a farm near Bardney, where the owner had lost both sons in France. His name was Mr. Whitmore, a narrow man with eyes like frost on a pond. He didn't speak at first, just pointed toward the collapsed roof of a cattle shed and said, "Fix it." The Germans worked in silence. Whitmore watched them like a man measuring ghosts. At noon, a kettle boiled on the stove inside the barn. His wife appeared, older, wrapped in wool, her face pale from grief and cold. She set down tin mugs filled with boiling tea. "Take it," she said simply. No guard intervened. When Keller hesitated, she added, "My boys fought men like you. Doesn't mean we can't be human." It was said without emotion, without ceremony. That was the English way, mercy disguised as duty. In February, as the ice melted, the camp changed. The guards were less strict. Roll call still happened, but sometimes with a smile. The commandant, Colonel Briggs, began sending prisoners in smaller work teams without armed escort. "They come back," he told his staff, "because they've nowhere better to go." And he was right. Not one escaped. The men had built something strange, a social order of civility. They earned camp tokens for extra work, spent them on tobacco, bread, and soap. The canteen clerk, a British corporal, even learned enough German to banter. "No tokens, no biscuits, Fritz." Rudy carved toys from scrap wood for the guards' children.
Fritz Albers, who had once dug trenches for the Wehrmacht, now repaired bicycles for the locals. His hands, meant for war, had found peace in grease and gears. Even evenings brought talk instead of tension. The British Guard sat outside their huts with mugs of tea, while German prisoners walked within sight, neither party pretending the wire was anything more than tradition. One evening, Keller was summoned to the commandant's office. He stood at attention out of habit, though Briggs waved it off. "No need for that, Keller. Sit." On the desk lay a folded paper, a commendation from Farmer Hughes, the man Keller had worked for months earlier. It read simply, "Reliable, honest, industrious, treats work with respect." Briggs tapped the paper. "We're assigning you to supervise a new detail, bridge repair near Lincoln. You'll lead 12 men. Report directly to Lieutenant Turner." Keller nodded, stunned. "Unescorted?" Briggs smiled faintly. "You're not prisoners, Keller. You're workers under custody. A subtle distinction, but an important one." When Keller returned to the hut that night, the others stared at him as if he'd been pardoned. He sat down and said quietly, "They trust us." Rudy frowned. "And if we escape?" Keller looked toward the window where frost glimmered on the wire like a halo. "Then we prove them wrong, and that would be worse than being their enemy." The next morning, he led his team out through the gate. No guards followed, only the open road, the hum of a truck engine in the distance, and a thin slice of sunlight rising over English farmland. The same sky that had once been filled with bombers now watched over Germans rebuilding the country they had tried to destroy. Keller felt the weight of that contradiction, not as guilt, but as education. The British, he realized, were not trying to teach forgiveness. They were teaching restraint, the rarest form of power.
March 1945. The war outside Camp 178 was collapsing. Germany was burning, cities vanishing into ash, armies surrendering by the tens of thousands. But in Lincolnshire, the world moved slower, by spade, by hammer, by quiet exchange. Keller's bridge repair detail had become a model team. 12 men, once soldiers of the Reich, now worked under British engineers who treated them like apprentices rather than captives. Each morning, they marched down to the Witham River, where frosts still rimmed the reeds and the air smelled of iron and rain. Lieutenant Turner, the officer in charge, was younger than Keller by nearly a decade, polite, firm, almost scholarly. He carried himself like a man who measured worth by competence, not rank. "Straight beams, Keller," he'd say, pointing to the frame, "not just strong, straight. You're building something that must last longer than this war." At first, Keller thought it was metaphor. By the third week, he realized it wasn't. The bridge had been bombed the previous winter, not by Germans, ironically, but by British aircraft during training. Turner wanted it rebuilt before the spring floods. The locals called it the German Bridge, though never with spite. When the structure began to take shape, villagers came to watch. Women with scarves tied against the wind, children trailing behind them. One afternoon, an old man leaned on the fence and said, "Didn't think I'd live to see Germans mending an English bridge." Keller straightened from his work. "We broke enough elsewhere. It's fair." The man chuckled, lighting his pipe. "Aye, and maybe this one holds." That night, Turner visited the hut where the men slept, carrying a stack of newspaper sheets. "The war's nearly done," he said simply. "Hitler's surrounded. Berlin's next." Rudy stared at the headline, "Russians at the Oder." No one spoke. Keller finally said, "When it ends, what happens to us?" Turner hesitated. "You'll stay until the Home Office sorts the transport. Some may work the summer farms. Britain needs hands." He folded the paper, placed it on the table. "You've built something here worth more than pay. Don't forget that when you go back." His words landed like an oath. The following week brought a storm, the kind that made England look biblical. Wind howled, rain turned the roads to soup, and the river swelled dangerously close to the half-finished bridge. Turner ordered the work halted, but Keller and 2 others went out anyway, tying cables against the current, pounding stakes through mud while lightning cracked above. When Turner arrived, furious and soaked, he shouted over the rain, "You'll drown, you fools!" Keller yelled back, "Then let us drown working." They didn't drown. The bridge held. When dawn came, Turner walked the planks, boots dripping, and said quietly, "You were right." Keller, exhausted, shook his head. "No, you were right. It needed to last." Turner's reply was as British as it was sincere. "Then it does." By April, the bridge opened for local use. Villagers brought bread, butter, and a jug of ale to celebrate. Turner made the Germans stand beside the British crew for a photograph. Rough men, tired, coated in dust, smiling awkwardly at a future none of them could yet imagine. That photo would later appear in a small local paper, with the caption, "Former enemy prisoners assist in restoration work. Cooperation builds more than bridges." Keller cut out the clipping and folded it into his notebook. That evening, as the men sat by the stove, Rudy said quietly, "We were soldiers, now we are builders." Keller replied, "No, Rudy, now we are men again." He looked toward the window, where the floodlights glowed faintly through mist, and realized that Britain had conquered them in the most unmilitary way possible. Not by fear, not by fire, but by expecting decency until they lived up to it. When the guards called lights out, no one spoke. Outside, the river moved under the bridge they'd built, carrying the rainwater east, towards the sea, towards Germany, towards whatever redemption waited beyond the wire.
May 8th, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The news arrived without fanfare, just as it had in every British camp that week. A brief announcement over the tannoy, followed by the whistle for afternoon work, as though nothing had changed. The German High Command has signed unconditional surrender. All hostilities in Europe have ceased. For a long moment, no one moved. The prisoners stood by their wheelbarrows, shovels frozen mid-air. Keller stared at the earth in front of him, trying to feel something, joy, grief, maybe even relief, but all that came was a hollow kind of quiet. The guards didn't cheer. They simply removed the bolts from their rifles and leaned them against the fence. That evening, the camp's gates stayed open, symbolically at least. No one left. The men wandered through the yard like ghosts between two worlds. War had defined them. Now peace demanded something else, something they hadn't yet learned how to be. Rudy said it first, "It's over, but what are we now?" Keller looked at the horizon, the same fields, the same smoke from farmhouse chimneys, the same unhurried British sky. "Workers," he said, "maybe that's all we were ever meant to be." In the following days, routine replaced victory. The bridge crew disbanded. Some prisoners returned to the farms, others to maintenance or road work. The guards still kept lists, still recorded hours, still served tea at 10:30. But the tone had shifted, less command, more conversation. One morning, Lieutenant Turner arrived in civilian clothes. "He's been reassigned," he said, shaking Keller's hand. "Demobilization, back to London. I'll miss this bridge of yours." Keller smiled faintly. "It's yours too, Lieutenant." Turner hesitated, then pressed something into Keller's palm, a small metal badge from his uniform. "Keep it," he said, "proof that an Englishman once trusted a German with his bridge." It was the only souvenir Keller would carry home. Summer came early that year. The wheat rose tall, and the camp grew strangely quiet. Every week, the repatriation lists were read aloud, names called in the mess hall like a roll of the living. Each man would stand, collect his papers, shake a guard's hand, and climb into a lorry headed for the docks. There were no parades, only nods and simple phrases. Safe travels. Good worker, that one. Tell your mother you built a bridge in England. When Rudy's name was called, he hugged Keller awkwardly, the kind of half-embrace soldiers permit themselves. I'll find work, he said, maybe fix things, maybe even build them. Keller smiled. That would be the right kind of war to fight next. By August, only a few hundred men remained. The commandant, Colonel Briggs, addressed them one last time. You came here as prisoners, he said, standing beneath the Union Jack. You leave as men who have worked and earned and conducted yourselves with discipline. That is all the record will say, but I will remember something else, that even enemies can behave honorably when rules are kept. He paused. If any of you wish to stay until transport is arranged, there is work still, harvest season, fence repair, pay as usual. Almost all volunteered, not because they feared leaving, but because they had come to understand order as a form of peace. When Keller's turn finally came, the paperwork was precise, as always. His discharge form read, prisoner repatriated, conduct exemplary, contribution to reconstruction noted. At the gate, a British corporal shook his hand. Strange thing, isn't it? The man said. You came here to destroy this island, ended up keeping it standing. Keller laughed softly. And you, corporal, taught me what standing means. He climbed into the lorry and looked back at the huts, the fences, the small bridge visible in the distance. The English flag stirred once in the wind, like a curtain closing on a long play. As the lorry rolled away, Keller felt no victory and no defeat, only a steady, unshakable truth. Decency had survived the war better than most men did. And perhaps, he thought, that was the real kind of strength the British had been fighting for all along.
Autumn, 1948. 3 years had passed since Martin Keller stepped through the gates of Camp 178 for the last time. The war was now a history lesson, but its echo lived quietly inside him, in the way he folded his clothes, kept his tools aligned, and made tea every morning with a precision that would have made a British sergeant proud. He lived now in Bremen, in a rebuilt flat above a bicycle repair shop. The sign outside read, Keller and Son Mechanics. It wasn't much, just a room, a workbench, and the steady hum of wheels turning, but it was peace, the kind that grew out of small routines rather than treaties. On the shelf above his desk stood a box, a camp token worn smooth from use, a photograph of the bridge at Lincoln mailed to him by Lieutenant Turner, a bar of English soap untouched, and the metal badge Turner had given him. He never displayed it, but he never put it away either. Germany in 1948 was a country still finding its reflection. Cities stood half-built, half-ashamed, balancing between memory and survival. Keller worked long hours repairing bicycles for people who could no longer afford cars, farmers who needed transport to market, children who had never seen a train. Some afternoons when he looked up from his tools, he would catch sight of British lorries rumbling through the streets, part of the occupation forces still stationed in the zone. The uniforms were the same, but the mood was different. No longer conquerors, just administrators of recovery. He nodded at them when they passed. Sometimes they nodded back. That winter, Keller received a letter stamped Royal Mail. The handwriting was unmistakably English, each letter disciplined, deliberate. Dear Keller, they're replacing the planks on our bridge this spring. Still holding strong after all these years, thanks to you and your lads. If you ever find yourself in Lincolnshire again, you've a place at my table. Yours sincerely, Lieutenant James Turner, retired. Keller read it 3 times before setting it beside the token box. For a long while he simply stared at it, then smiled, an honest, quiet smile that came not from pride, but from recognition. He had spent a lifetime in a nation obsessed with power, and yet the only thing that had ever truly changed him was restraint, the British refusal to turn victory into cruelty. That spring, Keller was invited to speak at a veterans gathering in Hamburg. Most came in faded uniforms, medals dull from storage. They spoke of battles, of loss, of comrades buried under foreign soil. When Keller's turn came, he didn't talk about Normandy, or capture, or even Camp 178. He told them about the bridge. They made us rebuild what we had helped destroy, but they never called it punishment. They called it work. And that changed everything. They could have humiliated us. Instead, they expected order, discipline, decency. It was the first time in my life I understood that civilization is not a banner or a speech. It's a habit. When he finished, the room was silent, not from shame, but from understanding. Years later, Keller would return to England, not as a prisoner, but as a guest. He stood by the same river, the bridge still there, weathered but unbroken. Children cycled across it, unaware that their wheels spun over timbers once laid by the hands of enemy soldiers. He placed his hand on the rail, the cold iron humming faintly in the wind. It held, just like you said, Lieutenant. A British farmer passing by recognized his accent and stopped. "You one of the German chaps who built this?" Keller nodded. The farmer smiled. "Fine work, that. Still standing strong." Keller looked out over the water, the sunlight trembling on its surface, and replied quietly, "Aye, it was built to last." He walked back to the road, a free man on free soil, carrying no flag, no guilt, only the quiet conviction that even in war's darkest shadow, honor had not drowned. Because once in a gray and civilized land, the British had shown him that strength could wear a human face. And that lesson, like the bridge, had endured every storm.